All right, welcome back to a special edition of Velshi Inside Project 2025. I want to go to Chapter 17. It's entitled The Department of Justice, written by a chap called Gene Hamilton. It says, quote, not reforming the Department of Justice will also guarantee the failure of that conservative administration's agenda in countless other ways. Now, a common misconception held by Donald Trump while he was president was that the Department of Justice worked for him, not for the American people. This chapter seeks to make that misconception true. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation and architect of Project 2025, is on board with Trump's perspective. He told the New York Times in January, quote, we just disagree wholly that the Department of Justice is independent of the president or the executive branch. Now, this Project 2025 thing, it's not an easy read. It's 922 pages long. The words and the sentences on these pages are, in fact, deliberately confusing. But make no mistake, Project 2025 calls for a Department of Justice working in lockstep with a potential Trump administration, which means if Trump is reelected, the branch tasked with independently and impartially upholding the rule of law will be in the hands of a convicted felon who has promised revenge and retribution against his personal enemies. What could possibly go wrong? Let's start with the FBI, which is a branch within the Department of Justice. While President Trump was supremely frustrated by his inability to control the FBI, because he wanted desperately for the FBI to drop its investigation into Russian interference into the 2016 election. So it follows that Project 2025 would encourage the next conservative administration to place the FBI under more, quote, politically accountable, end quote, leadership, which are code words for more loyal to the president. It also wants the FBI to stop investigating online misinformation, which is a new initiative that feels more important today than ever. But if Project 2025 has its way, the DOJ wouldn't look into that, just like it wouldn't investigate police misconduct. Another hidden detail in the chapter is the call to, quote, promptly and properly eliminate all existing consent decrees, end quote. Consent decrees, you've heard the term before, they're handed down by the Department of Justice to local jurisdictions following an investigation into police wrongdoing. Think of it as a court-ordered improvement plan. These decrees usually compel jails to improve their conditions or police departments to consider their tactics and report back to the Justice Department. Project 2025 argues that the DOJ should disclaim its ability to even hand down consent decrees. Another target of this chapter, local and state attorneys who use their own discretion to pursue or not pursue prosecution. Project 2025 calls for the Department of Justice to, quote, initiate legal action against local officials, including district attorneys who deny American citizens the equal protection of the laws by refusing to prosecute criminal offenses in their jurisdictions, end quote. Now, these words all sound good, but that would be a radical departure from the norm and goes against the very purpose of local district attorneys, as our friends at the Marshall Project write, quote, choosing which cases to pursue and which to drop is a core responsibility of prosecution. And one of the arguments for the local election of district attorneys is that communities may have different priorities on how those choices get made, end quote. But no such quarter will be given in a second Trump term. And if you'd prefer a DOJ that will defend and uphold voting rights, I got bad news for you on that front. Project 2025 would reorient the federal government's role from upholding voter rights to suppressing them. It takes specific aim at so-called mail-in ballot fraud and other types of voting registration that became targets of the big lie. Quote, with respect to the 2020 presidential elections, there were no DOJ investigations of the appropriateness or lawfulness of state election guidance. The Pennsylvania Secretary of State should have been and still should be investigated and prosecuted for potential violations, end quote. This paragraph is explicitly targeting specific officials whom Trump blames for his 2020 election loss. Again, what could go wrong? Project 2025's new era DOJ would cement long-standing grudges that Donald Trump holds against the various legal guardrails that he crashed into during his 4 years in office and in the years since. It would mutate the DOJ into nothing more than a crude beating stick for Trump and his allies to use against their perceived enemies. For more on this, I'm joined by Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation. He's also a former litigator and author of the book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. Elie, good to see you. There is a lot of disguised language within these pages. This though, is a recipe book for the weaponization of government against critics or anybody who encounters the justice system.
Yeah, when Donald Trump promises to prosecute his political enemies, Project 2025 explains how he's going to do it. But Ali, I want to go back to the top, back where you started with who wrote this particular section of this document, right? You said the man's name was Gene Hamilton. Gene Hamilton is the right-hand man of Stephen Miller, who is the unreconstructed ghoul that's on Donald Trump's shortlist to be the Attorney General of the United States and implement exactly this project should Trump get elected. So the idea that Trump doesn't know what's going on in this document simply does not pass its first contact with reality when his own advisors and potential picks for Attorney General are the ones writing the Attorney General section, right? And what is that section about? Ali, if you went and asked Trump, if you gave him a truth serum and you said, Donald Trump, show me on the doll where you were hurt, he would say the Department of Justice, right? He would say Jeff Sessions didn't stop the investigation into Russian interference. Instead, he recused himself. He would say Bill Barr didn't launch ridiculous investigations into election interference or argue that Trump won an election that he lost, right? Donald Trump has an active kind of PTSD over what the Department of Justice did to him while he was president. And so as president, again, if somebody should have the terrible idea of reinstalling him in power, his entire plan is to cower the DOJ and make them jump to his own rules. And he'll do that through Stephen Miller and through many of the ideas that you've outlined in this project, right? In this segment,
and some of them have nothing to do with conservative thinking at all. This election denial nonsense and the specific reference to the Pennsylvania Secretary of State is simply the retribution stuff that you just talked about, the beef, the PTSD about the Department of Justice. It's got nothing. There's no conservative thinking that would suggest that a particular Secretary of State at a particular point in time in a particular state should have done a particular thing.
There are like 2 or 3 paragraphs in there about Hunter Biden. All right, there two things can be true at the same time, right? One, Project 2025 is a recipe and a blueprint for fascism. Also true, it's extremely petty, it's extremely small-minded, and it's extremely vindictive, and you see that throughout the document. But one thing you didn't bring up in your opening segment was that as you go further into the document, you do start to see a lot of these conservative culture war issues, right? They want to prosecute people who help people get abortions, but they don't want to prosecute people who violate the rights of people to access abortions at clinics in states where it's still legal, right? They want to give a free rein to parents who intimidate and threaten school board members, and in particular, they want to change the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice into a division that sues on behalf of white people, claiming that white people have been denied equal protection whenever a company hires a black or brown person or a woman for a position. It's like that their whole DEI thing, that's also in this project, where they are going to now sue people for daring to hire a non-white heterosexual male. It's both terrifying and extremely clownish and petty, and we have to be able to understand both of those things at the same time, and we have to hopefully vote appropriately for the kind of country we want to see. Do we want to have lawyers making decisions about who should be prosecuted, or do we want to have vengeful dictators making decisions about who should be prosecuted?
And that's the problem with this document, because you've really got to read so much of it for it to make sense, because it's all over the map. But there's all of that stuff that you've mentioned is contained herein. Elie, good to see you as always. Thank you. Elie Mystal, justice correspondent at The Nation, author of Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. All right.